Anyway, so today we are joined by Dr. Berra Yazar-Klosinski from MAPS, as well as Federico or Fede Menapace, also from MAPS. And this presentation is coming on the heels of this huge publication of the phase 3 data for MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD, just published 10 days ago in Nature Medicine, with really phenomenal results that mirror what we saw in the phase 2 trials. And this is also, there have been these series of landmark events for MAPS. So for me, in my head, it started in 2019, there were these meta-analyses that came out of the phase 2 trials, which really suggested strong efficacy for MDMA-assisted therapy and suggested that it might compare favorably to the current treatments, paroxetine, sertraline, SSRIs. Then in 2020, there was this amazing paper that did a cost analysis and showed that MDMA-assisted therapy, as time and therapy intensive as it is, probably will be cost effective, which is so huge and important for partnering with payers moving forward when this becomes legal. And then a month or so ago, the FDA granted permission to continue this trial to train potential therapists using experiential MDMA sessions. And then, of course, 10 days ago, we've got this huge Nature paper about these phase 3 trial results. So it seems like the pace of these successes is accelerating. And so super excited for people today. So Dr. Berra Yazar-Klosinski, she's the Deputy Director of MAPS. The way I think about this, and she'll explain a little better, is doing the work of fitting the round or the square peg of MDMA therapy into the round hole of this regulatory requirement landscape that the FDA that is, and the magic and contortion and Herculean effort that takes. Do this, and I think all of the things we just mentioned is a testament to the success of the strategy of working with the FDA and collaborating. And a huge part of that has also been Fede Menapace, who recently joined MAPS and now is Director of Strategy, which, is one of the few times I hear that title and I actually know what that means or feel like that's a really important thing for a business. Not that I know anything about business. Anyway, the other fun fact is both Berra and Fede are former Stanford people. So Berra studied here as an undergraduate in biology and a little bit of a minor in drama, which I love, a little bit of drama. And Fede was recently here at part of the Graduate School of Business. So a lot of Stanford vibes in the house, really excited for today. And I should also say that this was organized by Jennifer Oyang, who's here with us, a current graduate in the Graduate School of Business. Big thanks to Jen. And with that, I will turn it over to Berra and Fede.
Thanks. It's really exciting to be here today. Fede, are you gonna share the slides that we've got? And it's been a whirlwind, and just to speak to the milestones that were being mentioned, a lot of those were very long-term efforts that just happened to come to fruition within the last couple months. So I think it just increases the impact and the universe has a plan. So, all right.
Sounds good.
Get us started.
Yeah, and thanks, Johnny and Jen, for having us. It's really exciting to be back. For me, I'm sure for Berra as well. I was wondering, Berra, maybe we can spend just a minute sharing more about what specifically in the organization we do for context.
Yeah, I'll start. So I'm currently the Chief Scientific Officer. I've been with MAPS for 11 and a half years and still counting. I actually started as an intern doing data entry when I was still working on finishing my PhD, and have been there ever since. So now I oversee chemistry and manufacturing department, biostatistics, data management, and GXP systems, which is all the validated systems that we have to use to do these trials relatively virtually. And also I run the toxicology program, and I'm the acting director of regulatory affairs. So I have a lot of jobs. Yeah. And I'm also involved in, anything with science in it, I'm game. So.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I've been at MAPS for a much shorter time, coming up to a year just now. And I work on the nonprofit side. We'll say a couple of words about the structure of our organizations in a second. Yeah, I want to say that probably most of my focus has been around fundraising efforts. MAPS and MAPS Public Benefit Corporation have done all the work that we've done to date just via philanthropic donation, about 110 million over the past 35 years. So figuring out how to raise money at scale, now that the demands for money are ever growing, is something I deal with, as well as I had an opportunity over the past few months to work with a few colleagues on developing our strategic planning process for our organization. And that means identifying our vision and then our 5-year strategic priorities across the board. Okay, so without further ado, I'll just share like what we're going to be talking about today, just a short introduction, historical introduction from me, and then Berra is going to walk us through primer on PTSD as well as the research update that we're here to hear about. And then if we have time, we can talk a little bit about next steps beyond FDA approval for us, but we don't necessarily need to do that, and then hopefully leave enough space for QA. How does that sound? Good to everyone? Okay, cool. And Berra, I'll show a few photos and feel free to jump in. Like you've got a lot more context than I do, but this is a fun photo from 1984. You see the person reflected in the front door of the DEA is Rick Doblin, our founder. And the whole ordeal there was that the DEA was moving to criminalize MDMA, despite the fact that it had been used for a long time by therapists to actually treat people that were struggling with mental health disorders. And once MDMA kind of escaped the therapist office and went like more mainstream when it came to like club use and recreational use, then the DEA wanted to criminalize it. And so Rick actually took it upon himself to sue the DEA because bringing all this evidence that actually MDMA had potential for medical purposes. And as we know, the Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substances Act includes drugs that don't have any medical use and also have high risk of abuse. And so his point was, this drug does have a medical purpose, and the trial, Rick actually won the trial, but the DEA rejected the judge's recommendation and then moved to schedule MDMA into a Schedule 1 regardless. And so then Rick started MAPS with the purpose of proving to the world that MDMA indeed had medical applications. And I think we've come so far since then, 35 years ago. This is just to show that it took years even before the first study on human was actually approved. And this is a photo of Charlie Grob at UCLA. That was the first, I guess, academic partner for a human trial with MDMA. And then it took approximately another 18 years, I guess, to complete the phase 2 studies. This is a photo of you guys at the FDA. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to this there.
Yeah. The entire time we were being like put everywhere we went by documentary people. So that it was kind of hilarious. Before the FDA meeting, this was the end of phase 2 meeting. We had like a 24-hour like war room planning session where we had gotten in very negative comments initially from FDA to our submission, and they said no to everything, and then we were like, okay, picking apart like what are they saying no to exactly? Like there's like a 2-page question and what part is the no? And so then we like broke it all down and addressed it. And we also had our consultant with us helping us in that preparation process that actually used to be the Division of Psychiatry director at FDA, who had initially authorized our program to begin in 2001. And so he still consults with us. His name is Tom Loughran. And so it was just this very kind of altered experience, just preparing for this. And then this was when we right after we had finished the meeting, and it went really well. And we had negotiated a bunch of things and gained agreement with our reviewers. And it was a very jubilant moment.
And to the left there, you see Rick Doblin, the founder and executive director, and then Amy Emerson, who's the CEO of the Public Benefit Corporation. There is in the middle, and then to the right are Michael Mithofer, who's been for the past, I think, more than 20 years, the chief psychiatrist at MAPS, and has been the person that basically helped develop the therapy training program and all of the protocols. And then the consultant, Tom Laughlin, is to the right. We'll see a quote by him.
Oh, that's Scott Hamilton, our
oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah,
he's still with us too.
Great. All right, and so we come to 2021, 5 years after that end of phase 2, and the past 5 years, I guess we've set up the first phase 3 trial, resulting in the article on Nature Medicine. We'll look at all the details. This was also picked up by the New York Times in a powerful article that came out, I think, a couple of weeks ago. And I think, Berra, you had maybe some story to share how all of this came together.
Yeah, so the data were available, like the results were available actually in October of 2020, and we submitted it for peer review initially in December, but then it took a lot of back and forth. We got rejected from the initial journal, and then had to go to the next journal, et cetera, to try to find the right fit for the publication. And we were trying to time the publication with the media. And so and as many of you may already know, embargo periods are a big deal. But luckily, with Nature Medicine, they're very open to more open science. They encourage authors to blog post about their work. And so with Nature Medicine, I really found like we had the right kind of ideological fit with, you know, what's necessary to get the word out. So even though we had a little bit of like difficulty in the end with timing when the journal was going to actually post the article versus our press release versus this media article, I think it ended up working out okay. But
it worked great. It was funny that the New York Times article happened. We knew it was going to come, but it published like that day before we were expecting. And so there was a lot going on at MAPS with all the resulting commotion, and but it was great. I think we got over 100 press mentions over the course of the past 2 or 3 weeks. So it's actually been like the most amazing time at MAPS in terms of public recognition and friends and families reaching out to, you know, surprised about the work that we're doing, and a lot of validation. And even our first meme. So I don't know if people had an opportunity to see this, but
that can't be the first meme. I'm sorry, that cannot be the first MAPS meme out there. This is the 100th.
Yeah, this one was
if you have any, funny. Please send them to us for our library. We don't know.
This is one of my favorites. I love this.
Okay, so a quick word just about our structure. So to the left, you see MAPS, the 501c3. It's a nonprofit organization that was founded 35 years ago. And then more recently, the MAPS Public Benefit Corporation was also incorporated as a wholly owned subsidiary of the nonprofit. And so the MAPS Public Benefit Corporation is the organization that actually does all the clinical trials and gets the treatment through the FDA, and then eventually will earn the revenues from the sale of MDMA in the US and hopefully also abroad. And then the proceeds of these sales can be used by the MAPS Public Benefit Corporation for additional research, for instance, additional indications beyond PTSD, as well as additional drugs in the pipeline. And then a portion of the proceeds can come back, instead of going back to shareholders in somebody's pockets, they channel back into the nonprofit. So the nonprofit can sponsor additional research and also education, and then also work on drug policy reform.
Also patient assistance programs too.
Yeah, exactly. So we're structuring this in a way that people that won't be able to afford treatment can get as much access to our treatment as possible, potentially even for free. All right, so Berra, to you.
All right. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about PTSD, and there's a lot that's known about PTSD. And also with the recent, global pandemic, it's also likely to increase in prevalence. So currently, this slide summarizes some of what's known about the prevalence of PTSD. We know that women are twice as more likely to suffer from PTSD, and they also tend to respond a little bit better than men, according to literature. to existing evidence-based PTSD treatments. And although the majority of kind of attention goes towards veterans with PTSD, I would say a much broader swath of the population are often women who are survivors of sexual assault and abuse. Furthermore, adverse childhood experiences are a huge driver for developing PTSD. And this is also something we measured in our trials as well. And probably what you don't see in the prevalence numbers here are the people of color who I think disproportionately suffer from PTSD and don't have the engagement and support of the healthcare system to even be represented in these numbers. Next slide. So in the recent revision to how psychiatric diagnoses are made, which was Diagnostic and Statistical Manual version 5, or the DSM-5, a new subtype of PTSD was defined called the dissociative subtype of PTSD. So this is about 30% of the diagnosed population with PTSD has this subtype, and their brains react differently to just having PTSD. So they'll often have kind of hyperactive prefrontal cortex and underactive amygdala and hippocampus. Whereas with the more standard kind of PTSD, which doesn't have its own defined subtype, so I've called it non-dissociative PTSD. Typically, the prefrontal cortex is undersignaling, the amygdala is hypersignaling, and kind of assigning fear labels to all the stimuli that are being presented, and the hippocampus is undersignaling. So we've been working on some public education stuff. So I just included a little snippet of that at the bottom so that people can really understand what it means to have PTSD. So generally speaking, there's a lot of avoidance, and depending on which subtype or not, hyperarousal or hypoarousal. But it's quite challenging to have someone with PTSD in your family, and often having someone with PTSD in your family also means that you're more likely to have PTSD yourself. And so because of the the community impact of PTSD, and also that I'll dive into this in the next slide in a minute, a lot of the available treatments are not really able to address the unmet medical need that still is there. Okay, next slide. So these are some statistics that summarize how PTSD is serious. This was what we summarized for the FDA when we were able to get MDMA designated as a breakthrough designated treatment. So there's a lot of risk associated with long-term exposure to chronic stress that not only causes PTSD, but also causes increase in all-cause mortality hazards, type 2 diabetes, increase in cardiovascular risk. And also there doesn't seem to be a worldwide agreement on what is PTSD. We're still having discussions with Europeans about how PTSD is in fact a biological disorder, and hence should be treated biologically. Yeah, so we can go to the next slide. So we've been doing something for our program. And so the figures I'm showing you here are what we're finding from really large data sets, doing claims analyses, et cetera. So these studies found that about 50% of newly diagnosed PTSD patients end up getting pharmacotherapy within 2 years. And then of those, half or more progress into using other kinds of medications. And the average time to progression is, approximately consistent with like a 12-week treatment course being considered adequate duration for an evidence-based PTSD treatment. However, one thing that is like, I always like to point out the subtext on like what's not on the slide. So what's not on the slide is that the people in the empty box, 49.2%, they're either getting no treatment, they're not realizing that they have PTSD, but even though they have a diagnosis, they kind of avoid it. It's part of the disorder. Or they're getting psychotherapy that's not really manualized or evidence-based. And so they're basically long-term maintenance interactions with psychotherapists. And often these psychotherapists can charge quite a lot of time for fee-for-service and aren't covered by insurance. So I think we can maybe go to the next slide then. So the prescribing trends for PTSD are that generally people get SSRIs and some combination of anxiolytics or benzodiazepines. And, kind of a concerning trend is that, anything other than SSRIs doesn't really have any evidence of, FDA approval for efficacy. So all that is off-label use from, after the first row. So that's important to note in this, over 37,000 patient data set. Next slide. And not only are people getting mostly off-label medications to treat their PTSD, they're also getting them in combination. And these combinations are very rarely studied in combination in clinical trials. So there's a very high level of polypharmacy. We've also seen this in our studies. Sometimes PTSD patients come to our study for screening and they're on 8 different medications. And who knows if anybody's studied whether those medications are interacting with one another and how they're interacting and how the person is feeling in the midst of all of that. So with the amount of polypharmacy going on, the very first thing we have to do for our studies is taper people off of the medications that they're getting. And you kind of have to, do informed consent and make sure that they understand that if they're taking 8 medications and you're still having PTSD symptoms, it means they're not working. So that's a pretty concerning current situation out there for PTSD patients. Next. We've taken the large kind of prescription databases. This is the 37,000 plus patient data set, and just summarized all the medications that these folks are on for longer than a year. And so clozapine to me was really, it being the front runner, was very interesting. Clozapine has so much risk associated with it. It has a pretty hefty REMS program that you have to go through in order to get it. There's blood-related side effects, and so that's the lead medication that people are on for longer than a year. And it's an antipsychotic and not an SSRI, for which only the SSRIs have the efficacy approvals. So the rest of the medications here, I mean, it's interesting to me that SSRIs are in the middle of the category here. But that could also just mean that people, when people try SSRIs, they don't want to stay on them for longer than a year, because there's also risk associated with, staying on SSRIs long-term, although some relapse prevention studies do support maintenance treatment. You're still kind of accruing all of those side effects as you stay on the drugs for longer term, because the body's adapting. And then you're in some version of reality in your body that is not necessarily what was studied in clinical trials. All right, next. So then let's introduce MDMA. These studies are the phase 2 studies that we used for justifying the breakthrough designated therapy. We all pooled analyses that Gianni was mentioning when we got breakthrough therapy designation. And as you can see, the effect sizes that are placebo or control adjusted for sertraline, paroxetine, and MDMA, they've all been treated similarly. The effect sizes are really different. And also the percentage of dropouts are really different as well. So if somebody's getting any drug every day for 12 weeks, that's going to have a very different safety profile than getting MDMA in the case of these studies 2 or 3 times spread over 3 to 4 months. And then, you can read more in the references. I think we'll provide the slides after the call.
Yeah, and we actually have an updated slide for the phase 3 data, which would be good to see.
Yeah, I didn't want to spoil it before I got there. That's why I took out the phase 3 one. All right, so next. All right, now let's talk about the phase 3 results. So The phase 3 trial design that we landed on was 3 sessions. In phase 2 studies, we tried both a 2-session study as well as a 3-session study. And then we also tried giving people 2 sessions and then only giving some of them 3, and, you know, tried it all sorts of different ways, and landed on a 3-session model being best for, you know, mitigating the risk of failure in such a large and expensive undertaking, which is a phase 3 clinical trial. The phase 3 trials are done in US, Israel, and Canada. So we hope to, you know, work in those 3 countries as our kind of front runner countries for our global trauma healing plan. What I'm showing on the side is a phase 3 clinical trial site. This one's actually at UCSF. So we took a hospital room and turned it into this. And in large part, with site activation, what we're doing is, you know, bringing in elements of low lighting, soft music, aesthetic touches, and all of these actually kind of prime the system for better signaling with oxytocin. And so I don't know if some of you might have given birth at some point. So, you know, we did the same thing with birthing. And there's 12 sessions of talk therapy given in conjunction with the 3 sessions of MDMA or placebo. There was a lot of extra work we did to minimize bias in this study. So about, you know, I'll get into that in a little bit, but this independent rater pool was really key. And with all of our regulatory negotiations, we got it verified that the regulators agree having a blinded, centralized outcome assessment group that doesn't see the patients ever outside of those assessments and doesn't know what order the visits are in, is the gold standard for minimizing bias in terms of, you know, minimizing bias on the study and supporting the efficacy outcomes. So we included folks with chronic PTSD who they had to have it at least for 6 months symptom duration, and the baseline assessment on the clinician administered PTSD scale, which is how we qualify and measure outcomes for the study, was done after the preparatory sessions in the phase 3 design. And that ensures that we don't end up having responders to just talk therapy. And it's a little bit of an enriched sample, which boosts the magnitude of the treatment effect that you get at the end. So both of the groups are getting a total of 42 hours, but of this, 18 hours are talk therapy and 24 hours are in the context of MDMA or placebo. So when you compare this to other standard of care talk therapies, they also have 18 hours. So it's basically like we're tacking on 3 days of MDMA or placebo to standard of care. And we also did fidelity ratings according to a treatment manual and clinical supervision. So the psychotherapy was controlled but not rigid. And the dosing was developed on the basis of the phase 2 studies, where we found that having an easier entry into this kind of a treatment paradigm is easier. So we picked an 80 milligram initial dose with a 40 milligram supplemental dose to start, and then people had the option to go up if they wanted, and most people picked going up. All right, next. So this is where we're at with our phase 3 program. We've finished 1 phase 3 trial, and the second phase 3 trial is about a third enrolled, and 18 of them treated, which is super exciting. And we have 11 sites up and running in the midst of, you know, global occurrences, which is quite an achievement. Next. I mentioned earlier that, you know, veterans get a lot of attention, but actually are underrepresented in the overall PTSD population. So our trial was the same in terms of that. We had 13 veterans, and most of them were men. In general, female veterans tend to have military sexual trauma most likely. So that was also the case in this study. And then we're showing here some the breakdown of the average duration of PTSD that the participants had been suffering from. So on average, they had it for 14.1 years, but 25% of them, or 25 participants, had it for 20 years or more. And according to the records, the maximum duration of PTSD in the trial was 63 years of PTSD. So I thought that was pretty interesting. So the breakdown is very illuminating. And then only 2.2% of them had not tried a prior PTSD treatment, even though it wasn't specifically designed to be a treatment-resistant study. Also, a very important fact of having severe PTSD that's chronic is that there's a lot of suicidal thoughts and behavior that comes along with that. So both groups had very high levels of suicidal thoughts in their past life. And many of them had previously attempted suicide, and that's the positive behavior category there. This was something we really had to very closely manage during the study to make sure that we didn't have any issues. But I think we were pretty successful, as you'll see in a few slides, on mitigating that risk. So here's the phase 3 results. So I'm just going to do a very brief primer on p-values. So the p-values are the probability of basically incorrectly concluding that your trial is successful, and how you manage that. So a p-value of 0.5 is not significant, and it equates to a 1 in 2 chance that the treatment is no more effective than placebo. And typically, in order for a trial to be considered successful, it has to have a p-value that's less than or equal to 0.05. And that's typically the minimum that's required for FDA to conclude that your study is positive. So in our phase 2 studies, in a couple of the studies, we had seen a p-value less than 0.001. We had another one that was less than 0.002. So anything less than or equal to 0.001 is described as robust or very persuasive. And what we found in our study was a p-value of less than 0.0001. And the qualitative term for this is statistically very persuasive. So that's a 1 in 10,000 chance that we're incorrectly rejecting the null hypothesis. So we're pretty confident in the results of the trial, also keeping in mind all of those bias minimization measures that I had mentioned earlier. So this is where we get into the trajectory of change. So at baseline, the groups were very homogeneous, and then the placebo group in blue, they experienced improvements. They got some of the world's sweetest therapy, according to what Barbara Rothbaum described it as. She's a PTSD key opinion leader at Emory that's been doing this work for many years, but not on psychedelics, just on PTSD. And so the placebo with therapy was not that bad, but and the MDMA added on top a pretty big and sizable treatment effect. And the treatment effect size was 0.91, and that's adjusted for the placebo control. We ended up excluding one person from analysis because they had missing data that they didn't meet our pre-specified definition of being able to be included in the primary analysis. So we had to exclude one person. But overall, we were able to include, 89 of the 90 people treated. And then the secondary the secondary endpoint for the study, this is something that's really important for your drug label. So, the drug label is really going to target PTSD, but along with PTSD, there's a lot of functional impairment that comes along with it. And it's quite challenging to try to get an add-on to your label that not only does it treat the disorder, but also associated functional impairment. And we were also successful on the secondary endpoint, although the effect size was less with the Sheehan Disability Scale. And we had to modify it a little bit to per FDA request to limit item level missing data. But overall, very happy that we also got a win on the secondary endpoint. Next. Furthermore, we also found statistical improvements in depression symptoms. So this is also very highly comorbid with PTSD. I mean, the comorbidity ratios are around 85% of people have depression secondary to PTSD. Although they are, the literature does suggest that they're independent constructs, there's still a relationship of like, if you have PTSD, you're generally depressed. So we also found improvements on that. So that further improves our level of confidence in the findings that we're seeing improvement on multiple measures, multiple pre-specified endpoints. And just to compare this again to the effect sizes, this is just a little reminder of what is currently out there. And also, not everybody's getting even Paxil and Zoloft. Next. Yep, and then we got this. Next.
Berra, could you talk a little bit about the difference between the 0.91 effect size and the 2.1?
Oh, the 2.1. So the 2.1 is essentially a within subjects effect size. So it just looks at the change in the MDMA group on average, normalized to the standard deviation in the MDMA group. So this is like an output that you would get if you were just doing an open label single arm study. So I think that for some folks, it has a lot of meaning, and for others, it has very little meaning because there's scientists like to pay attention to between group change. If one group did this and another group did this, and what was the difference between the groups, that's more meaningful for scientists. But I think for in terms of how MDMA would be used in clinical practice, nobody's going to just get MDMA. They're always going to get MDMA in the context of psychotherapy and or supportive therapy. And so that's why some would say that a 2.1 effect size just in the MDMA group better portrays the amount of change that one can expect, because on its own, psychotherapy actually does have an effect, and it does change the brain, and it does have some level of supportive effect, perhaps more than the medications involved on the left-hand side with the small and medium effect sizes.
Exactly, because in those studies, you would either take the drug or the placebo, whereas in our studies, you either get the drug plus psychotherapy or you get the placebo plus psychotherapy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So then what the results we were showing you previously were just on the continuous scale of the CAPS, the clinician administered PTSD scale. And there's also an output where the CAPS tells you, do you still have PTSD or not? And so the results we found were that the control group in the phase 3 study, 30% of them actually qualified for not having PTSD anymore. And then we compared this to the MDMA group, and 67% of them didn't have PTSD anymore. So from this, just, at a very high level, it seems like there's a twofold improvement with adding MDMA to the existing talk therapies. And we're working on the long-term follow-up. So we'll have data coming in from 6 to 24 months after treatment. And that work is being centrally run at UCSF right now. And then just to compare this to why are the results different than phase 2? So the results underneath from phase 2 were based off of 2 sessions. So that could be one reason that we actually got better efficacy or effectiveness on an individual level in the phase 3 trial. So our results were off of 3 sessions in the phase 2. And there could be other factors as well, like we had many more therapists involved in doing the phase 3 trial. And they each went through 3 years of training and had to do a whole trial run study before they got to the phase 3 trial. So it could also be practice effects that the therapists just got better over time.
Okay.
Next. So I had mentioned the newly defined dissociative subtype. So this subtype is actually pretty treatment refractory to existing evidence-based therapies. I think that perhaps maybe there's some evidence-based therapies that are able to address, like EMDR might be able to address the dissociative subtype. I have to go double check that. But in our study, we found we are also able to treat the dissociative subtype of PTSD. And folks who are in this subtype tend to have like the early life stress, early exposure to childhood trauma. And in our study, our sample had on average severe ACE scores. And we didn't see a difference in terms of their treatment outcomes based on their ACE score, which was pretty interesting because, I was talking to Bessel van der Kolk about these results, and he said there's not really anything out there for PTSD patients who've had really early exposure to trauma. And then most of them tend to end up in the dissociative subtype as well. So this was really encouraging. And the numbers are small, which is why we're not making a huge deal out of it in the publication, because we had to take it out because of peer reviewers. They said, you're really going to make a big deal out of, 6 people in the MDMA group. And we're like, but it's so important. Anyway, so we had to take that out. Next. We also didn't find any site-to-site differences in our study. So the very, very low p-value also supports that you wouldn't expect to see site-to-site differences. But this is great for in terms of FDA's inspection planning, because typically FDA will go and pick on the sites that, disproportionately contributed to your efficacy signal. And we currently don't have any that disproportionately contributed based off of the lack of differences between sites. It also is very encouraging because we just launched the world's largest MDMA training program the other day with over 300 trainees in the cohort, and 98 of them were from outside of the US. And a third of them were practitioners of color, and many of them got scholarships. So I think that this is really a testament to how well the therapy training program was able to prepare people for working on these phase 3 trials, and we're now using it for scaling.
Could you share a bit about how many hours of training are required for therapists to become certified?
Yeah, so for the phase 3 trial, it was more because they had to do training and then do a trial run study and then get their videos reviewed, and then they were released into being able to work on the phase 3 trial. In the current relaunched training program, it's about 100 hours of training. And it also includes this experiential component that we're able to offer people the opportunity to try MDMA in the context of a clinical trial.
Great. This is also a good moment for a call out. So Berra, you mentioned that a third of the new members of the cohort are people of color, and we were able to award more than 100 scholarships for therapists to be able to pay $0 to receive our therapy training program. And this actually worked that Jen, who interned at MAPS over the past summer, devised in terms of a plan of a health equity program.
Oh.
Where we are, and a program that was developed to help therapists from marginalized communities receive training, as well as providing patient access subsidies for those that can't afford treatment. Now we're set up to be able to treat up to 50 patients within an expanded access program, which is pre-FDA approval. And up to 50% of them will receive full treatment cost recovery. So thanks, Jen, for all of your help on that work.
It was a great internship. So if anyone else is looking for internships, and you
we're also hiring. So
yeah. Okay.
Make sure you check our website for that.
Let's actually say that. Let's take a minute just to talk about this. Like both MAPS and the MAPS Public Benefit Corporation that have separate websites are hiring a lot. We'll see more about the commercial hires later in the deck. And we're always looking for summer interns. So if anybody is interested to help for the summer and or in full-time positions, please reach out, and we'll make sure that we can leave our email addresses later.
Yeah, sounds good. So let's talk a little bit about safety. This was the first trial where we had enough placebo-controlled data to be able to cut down on our very long list of possible risks that MDMA could have. So this is the resulting list from comparing the MDMA to the placebo group. So what we found was not all that surprising. I mean, everybody knows that MDMA causes dilated pupils, so that's on there. and that, MDMA can cause nausea. There's serotonin receptors in the gut that are likely the cause of that. There's a lot of sweating, lack of appetite. So these are all known pharmacological effects of the drug. I think what's important to note is that we didn't see any new safety signals that emerged that weren't previously known. And so this actually kind of boosts our ability to be able to argue that we have more safety data that's relevant from healthy volunteer studies because we don't see a big difference between PTSD data and healthy volunteer data. So that's actually very good in terms of the size of our safety database. Next. So we had some key adverse events of special interest that had been highlighted because of the drug. So we started out the study without including suicidality because there was no reason to expect that MDMA may induce suicidal thoughts. However, there was reason to expect, based on the sympathomimetic effects of the drug, that we might have some cardiovascular issues. There could have been QT interval prolongation issues. We hadn't yet done those studies thoroughly. And it's also hard to detect QT interval prolongation in the context of a really high increase in pulse. And then because MDMA is Schedule 1, abuse potential was on there too. And then partway through the study, FDA asked us to report every time somebody had an increase in suicidal thoughts. They wanted us to report it on an expedited time frame to FDA. So that was definitely a kerfuffle because we were not expecting it. It's already very high in the population for the study. And so we then had to embark upon a series of, catching up kind of safety reports to bring the program up to speed with what FDA's current thinking became partway through the study. Really important to note that their MDMA did not increase suicide risk in the end. There were more people in the placebo group who had suicidal thoughts. What you don't actually see in this is that the number of times that each participant reported suicidal thoughts was massively greater in the placebo group as well. So it was like in the 30s, for 5 participants. And then there were 3 participants in the MDMA group who only reported it 3 times, for contrast. And then with the cardiovascular, we also didn't end up finding anything that would be concerning for QT interval prolongation, which was also very interesting. Only 1 person in the placebo group reported having palpitations. And there weren't any reports of dependence or substance use disorders for MDMA in either group. And there were 3 SAEs. These serious adverse events are defined as being life-threatening, or if they're not treated, they could become life-threatening. There were no people in the MDMA group who had an SAE, and the 2 participants in the placebo group cumulatively reported 3 events. So it was actually harder to manage the placebo in the study than it was to manage the MDMA.
Okay, this is a summary slide that we can cover and maybe leave some space for Q&A.
Yeah. Any questions?
Okay.
Are we going to do the summary slide maybe and then we can have questions after that, or did you?
Yeah, if you wanted to walk through it there, but essentially these are points that we've already made. We decided to summarize these 5 ones as important ones, are also for the looking forward, what we need to confirm in terms of the additional phase 3 trial. This last few minutes, Berra talked about the safety profile, the adverse events, and we would categorize that as like a good safety profile.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds great.
Well, thank you so much, Fede and Berra. It's like the breakdown of a really exciting news splash into very well organized and sober charts. Always appreciate that. I'll just lead off. One thing that really stands out to me, obviously this idea of 2/3 of people 2 months later no longer meeting criteria for PTSD anymore, after an average of having a severe form of it for 15 years on average, 14 years on average, say. What stands out to me is that a third of people who didn't get any MDMA no longer meet criteria. And I think this speaks to your point earlier that there is something about this, 18-week protocol, the intensity of these 8-hour sessions, the therapy diet, and the MAPS training, therapist training specifically, without any of the MDMA fireworks.
Yeah.
That seems to have these profound and even transformative effects. Just, that really stands out to me. Any comments on that? And curiosity about how those effects may be durable relative to the MDMA group.
Yeah, I mean, in the long-term follow-up study that we're doing right now, this will be the first time that we're getting long-term follow-up data on the psychotherapy with placebo. So it's going to be really interesting to see if those effects are lasting. So usually with placebo response in standard pharma trials, what you would expect to see is, fairly dramatic placebo effects. That's what is informing those very small effect sizes for the SSRIs, because when you take out the massive placebo effect, you're left with very little. And so with our therapy, the psychotherapy component is not exactly the same as like what's being delivered as an evidence-based manualized psychotherapy, for example, in the VA, but the results are pretty similar, actually. So psychotherapy works, and nobody's contesting that. It's just that most of the time in private clinical practice, practitioners are not able to or not interested in following a fully manualized evidence-based trauma-focused psychotherapy. It's like the manuals are quite rigorous and strict, and for a lot of folks who have PTSD, I think it's a barrier for them to even get interested in psychotherapy, because that means that you're gonna have to sit for 18 hours over 12 weeks with somebody in a room and tell them about all of your problems and how it's affecting your life and everything. And a lot of people are just not willing to go there. And I can understand that, So I think with MDMA, it's, if nothing else, it's getting people in the door of their psychotherapist's office. And the amount of interest that we have, I just checked on our recruitment numbers from May 12th, and there's 5,663 people that have signed up with zip code profiling to be in the second phase 3 trial, and it's only for 100 slots. So, and that's not even including Israel or Canada. So I think that is really if nothing else, it's getting people motivated to get in the door and get some help.
Yeah, that I was going to ask 3 follow-up questions, but I'll hold off. We got two people raising their hands. Gabe, you want to chime in, and then Michael, I'll call on you after.
Sure. Fede, nice to see you. And Berra, thanks for joining. I have perhaps a bit of a naive question here. I was curious, for all of the patients, do they all have a particular incident that the PTSD is stemming from, or are there some patients that it's an accumulation of smaller things, or maybe this is a whole other can of worms, but is there any, I don't know, the concept of intergenerational trauma here? I don't know what the science says here, but I was curious, is there just always a particular conscious single event that the PTSD is stemming from?
Yeah, I mean, it's a mix. And with the DSM-5 revision, what qualified as an index trauma event was actually redefined to be quite narrow. So, for example, racially informed trauma doesn't count because it's not life-threatening or you didn't see somebody get killed. And so that is really constraining, I think, for the PTSD therapy field, where a lot of people are actually suffering from these symptoms, and now they don't even qualify under the DSM-5 for a PTSD diagnosis. So what do they have? And so that's a big question that you just asked. And also what we found is that most of the people in the trial do have multiple traumatic experiences, especially the ones that I had mentioned earlier that had adverse childhood experiences. The way we typically think about this is that folks are exposed very early in life to stress. And then, yeah, we did collect the ACE scores, and they were 5 on average for each of the groups. And so 4 and up is considered severe, just for context. So, the way we think about this based on our data is that folks are exposed to traumatic event after traumatic event after traumatic event, but they may not necessarily come down with PTSD necessarily. And then there's one big event that finally happens, and that's like the precipitating event. And then it becomes, full-on PTSD symptoms present themselves after that point, typically.
Okay.
Go ahead, Michael.
I had a comment and a bit of a complex question. The comment is that it's incredibly professional, the way that you've done these studies. It's really remarkable what you've done and the care that you've taken, and it really shows in the work that you've done. The question I have is, and I know you addressed it in your paper, but it's something that is really perplexing to me, and I think for me in my own mind is a barrier to really appreciating the effect of both the drug and the treatment, which is about the issue about expectancy effects and the effects of placebo and blinding. And so if only 2 of the participants who received the MDMA incorrectly guessed at their assignment, it has to have some impact on how people report their symptoms, because the purpose of the study is to study this not only novel treatment, but kind of magical treatment for PTSD. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about how that affects the effect size, for example, or the actual results of the study, and then what you might have planned outside of this FDA registration program to address those issues in the future, and how might you think of a way to do studies that minimize that effect, so that we could really learn, one, what the effect of the drug is, and then secondarily what the effect of the drug on people's experience in psychotherapy is. So
yeah, and I think that the long-term results are really where this is going to really shine through, because dirty little secret about psychiatric clinical trials is that most of them are functionally unblinded. You can look at the esketamine trials. They're listed to be functionally unblinded in the NDA statistician reviews. They still got approved. SSRIs, you can tell that you're on an SSRI from the side effect profile. They're functionally unblinded, every single one, almost. And this is straight from Tom Laughran's mouth. And he's the one that approved lots of those drugs, and he's an honest guy. And so what we ended up doing in our phase 2 studies that I didn't really get into in this one is that instead of an inactive placebo, we tested small doses of MDMA as a control, like a low dose comparator. And we did see an improvement in the level of confusion that people were reporting, because we assessed the strength of the blind in each of those studies. We also did a dose response design where the dose response designs are better able to support the strength of the blind, because instead of randomly guessing that you got the right thing, it just reduces that chance of random correctness when you have three dose groups for a parallel design study. Furthermore, what we did in our phase 2 studies is we obfuscated the informed consent, which you're allowed to do according to GCP, which governs how you do clinical trials and ethics and participant safety. So we told people that there was a chance that they might get MDMA in the study, and we didn't disclose the probability. And so then after the study, within the 3-month end of the study, then people were informed about what they got. So we tried a lot of different things to try to figure out how to do the blinding. But in the end, the deciding thing for the choice of the control group in the phase 3 trial was that with all of these low dose control studies, we actually found that it advantaged the active drug in terms of the treatment effect. So that means because the low dose of MDMA was not great, people got anxious, their PTSD got worse. And then when you do a between group comparison, the effect looked bigger. And so from that, we talked through this insoluble problem with FDA and decided to go with the methods that we came up with. And then we're still going to be adding a formal assessment of the blinding strength to the second phase 3 trial to try to get at this question a little better. But we already know what it's going to show. They're going to be functionally unblinded.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important that you're thinking about it and figuring out ways to address it. And I think we as a field are going to have to find a way to sort of address that. And I agree with you completely about the esketamine trials. I mean, the one thing that I would say about those trials is that their effect size became so small that one of their trials was negative. And so that's a concern, not a concern, it's probably a reality going forward, that the more you generalize the sample, the more likely you're going to have a diminution of the effect as they did in doing their studies. But I think it's great. I think that the professionalism with which you've done the studies and presented them is really remarkable. And so you should be applauded for that.
Thanks. I think maybe we had a couple more questions after Michael's that we didn't get to. I was just going to see if I can get to any of those. So, we talked about the expectancy bias, PTSD, and GI disorders. We did not measure effects on GI disorders, but we're currently working on a bunch of exploratory measures that we collected in the context of the phase 3 trial, and we'll be working on publishing those. So one of them that's really exciting is that we found a reduction in disordered eating behaviors. So in our study, and we're working with some eating disorder experts in the fields that are working on writing that up and presenting that work. So we also found a significant reduction in alcohol use disorder symptoms, so with the audit measure after going through the trial. So there are a number of really interesting exploratory outcomes that are probably going to be informing our future drug development plans directly coming out of this study.
I think Jen also wanted to chime in with a question as well. Maybe this will be our last one.
Sure. And Berra, you kind of just read my mind because you mentioned that the depression symptoms were also reduced. And I was just curious, what are the implications of the exploratory, the right words are.
The exploratory endpoints.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, so you have to take them with a grain of salt, right? Because these are exploratory, meaning that if you just keep saying, oh, and this was significant and this was significant, you increase your risk of, multiplicity. So these are just kind of little signals for saying, oh, this might be worth doing another fully controlled study where it's the main goal of the study. And so, so that's what we're using these exploratory findings for. And, they're published with multiple grains of salt. And then the plan is to launch new phase 3 programs after the PTSD one, because we've done a lot of work to scale up like our manufacturing and our planning for any new indications. This really ties into that kind of sustainable model that Fede was showing with providing additional funding for future research. And so that's the plan that we're working on right now, is figuring out what disorders are worth focusing on next based off of the data we already have in hand.
Thank you. And so I just want to make sure Rasmus gets their question answered. Were the subjects MDMA naive?
No, they were not. But if you look at the usage in the last 10 years, there was no difference between the MDMA and the placebo group, and the percentages were quite low. But if you look at lifetime use, I think it was about a third of them had previously tried MDMA at some point in their lives. And we also had limits on the total times. But of course, that's it's self-reported, so it's a little bit challenging to fully assess that one.
Thank you.
I know we're 9 minutes over here, so I'll let you go in 1 second. But before I do, wanted to just invite you to speculate. Let's say 10 years from now, we're at the beginning of this decade. 2030, assuming things go plus or minus smoothly, with a little bit of variation. Mm-hmm. Where will we be with MDMA therapy in 2030? What does this look like in 10 years? What do you hope it will look like?
Yeah, my sincere hope is that, PTSD is just another tool in the toolkit for psychotherapists, and that, it's used to really jumpstart healing in the world with, a variety of indications. And many of them, they don't necessarily have to be psychiatric indications either, because we're finding that MDMA does have very interesting effects on the body in terms of reducing inflammation, or kind of adapting in the level of inflammation in the body. And there's likely to be, I know it came up earlier about the intergenerational thing. And with the eating disorder finding, we found a significant improvement in the MDMA group relative to placebo. So, and we have approval to do another eating disorder study. So I do think that we're going to end up seeing, social anxiety disorder, eating disorders, alcohol use disorder at a minimum, potentially approved in 10 years for this. And we're also really working on globalizing this, which is a huge undertaking that I'm currently involved in planning. So we want to try to reach out to developing countries who need this support and don't have the monetary funding. So I think it's really going to be catalytic.
More broadly available across the map, more versatile, a tool available for different kinds of things.
Yeah.
Sounds good. So we'll have you back in 10 years, and it'll be MDMA-assisted therapy for blank. And
blank.
Yeah.
Or it could just be MDMA in combination with digital therapeutics. You never know. So this depends on the indication.
Well, thanks so much, Berra. Thanks, Jen, for setting this up. Totally would love to have you back at some point. I know you'll be back at Stanford for some futuristic sci-fi talk sometime soon. Anyway, yep. But that was really, really wonderful. Thank you so much for doing all of this work behind the scenes, and then for showing us today.
Yeah.
And thanks everyone for coming.
It's been a pleasure. All right. Bye.
Take care.